Welcome back, everybody. So let me continue from where we left. Just need to say a few useless things just for the time for the silence to come. Yes, awesome. So this is where we were. But now something changed. Something changed because you notice here that something is heterogeneous. Basically, you don't have a schema. You cannot put a schema that is not exotic. It would have to be exotic because what you would have to do is here a union between integer or an array, or you would have to say just item, like anything. But this is not a schema that would allow you to build a data frame, right? It's no problem to Spark, takes a hammer, hits it hard enough, and this is what you get, data frame. But if you look closer, what's happening here is that the colon is a string, and everything here is a string. This is a string, this is a string, this is also a string, this is all a string. I put the quotes to make it clear. Of course, the quotes are not part of the string, but I just wanted to show you that even the array is a string. What is in that string? We know the words to describe that. It's a serialization of the array as a JSON literal, right? We've seen that. You parse, you serialize. So what happens is that this array here, it gets reserialized to a string, and then everything is a string. Now, at first sight, it looks great, right? Because we actually took that and we put it in a data frame. Seems like we can always do that. The problem is that you've basically just told the user, that's not my problem, that's yours. That's what you're telling the user here, because you're basically saying now, good luck with that. Like the user now has to reparse that, probably write a Python script that has some if you can parse it as a string, then do this. If you can parse it as an array, then do that. But that you can no longer do with SQL. You have to actually write Python, maybe 10 lines of code that is going to make the distinction. Who sees that it's cumbersome? Right. Awesome. So this is, sorry? Well, the problem is that you cannot explode anything because these are all strings here. There's no array, right? The explode, if you look at the way it worked, that was because we had arrays. So when you have an array type, then you can explode it like this because Spark SQL sees the array. The problem here is that there is no array. It's in here, it's a serialized array, but it's a string now. So you cannot do this. But we'll see later with JSONic, you can do that. With JSONic, you can do it, but I will explain why that is the case. But here, this is really a string. So you have to treat it as a string, and you would have to do some additional work in Python. So this is one example of where we are basically meeting the limits of what data frames and SQL can do. We are basically trying to use data frames for something that they shouldn't be used for, right? Because this on the left clearly doesn't fit in a data frame. All right, but that will keep us busy in the coming weeks. Maybe this week, if we start tomorrow and a bit next week, I will explain to you what other solutions we have for these cases, right? So this is a general hint in general in databases, but also computer science in general. Whenever you learn something, can be a technology, can be an algorithm, a paradigm, and so on, you always need to understand its domain of I'm going to say domain of usefulness. There is always some use cases for which it's absolutely great, and some other use cases where you could make it work if you hit it with a hammer, but it's actually not working very well. And so in that case, what you need to understand is that data frames are fantastic if the data is homogeneous enough. Nested is fine. It's great at nesting if you accept this thing here. But if it's heterogeneous, then that's even more complicated. So this is the one thing to understand, right? And the solution in the end is really use case dependent. If you work in a company later, there is no universal answer. It's not true that SQL is good for everything. It's not true that JSONic is good for everything. It's not true that Spark is good for everything. You really need to look at every single use cases you have. Look, what's the size of the data? What does it look like? What is it stored as? And so on, right? And then you can decide on the technologies that make it both productive and performance. Okay. Now, this final slide is just to say that if you want, you can turn data frames into RDDs and RDDs into data frames. Now, turning a data frame into an RDD is easy because it's just an RDD of rows. That part is easy. But the other way around is not easy. If you have items here and you want to push them into a data frame, that requires a bit more effort. You need to make sure the items are structured in the way you want, plus you supply a schema, and then you can turn it into a data frame, right? So it's a little bit more involved. It doesn't happen automatically. So it's not like loading JSON and it takes care of it. Here, you really have to do some work and put the schema. All right, this, I think, concludes the chapter on Spark. Are there any questions? On Zoom? Okay. Who understood? Okay, I see. Okay, very good. So that makes me happy. Very good. So I'm going to interrupt the recording here.